Good evening, everyone, and thank you. My name is Seisha, and I'm the social media manager at Charis Books, which is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore, and Charis Circle, which is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. We're here tonight to welcome our two authors, Sarah and Sanjena, and oh my god, I'm so nervous. I'm like starstruck in front of you. This is hilarious. I've been like obsessed with this book. Like I consumed it ferally for like a year. And it's like crazy to meet you in person, but I'm so excited to be celebrating your book here today. And I'm excited to meet you as well. But yeah, I'm going to introduce you both. Sanjena is the author of the critically acclaimed novel Gold Diggers, which was named a top 10 best book of 2020 by Washington Post, a best book of 2021 by NPR, Electric Literature, and Amazon, and longlisted for the Center of Fiction's First Novel Prize. Thank you for being here tonight in conversation with Sarah, who is the author of All This Could Be Different, a 2022 finalist for the National Book Award. And All This Could Be Different is your first novel, which is so cool and very inspiring. But yeah, I'm going to leave and let the people who came to listen to talk. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Seisha. For being here. And I just wanted to say that it's really special for me to be here. It's my first time in Atlanta, and Sanjena is both a dear friend and a comrade in the writing trenches. We were in school together once upon a time, and also very frankly is one of the writers working today who I most admire. And so it's just very cool and special to be here. And I want to say doing this sort of in conversation with events is always funny because it feels like one person's book is spotlighted a bit more. But those of you who have not read Gold Diggers, Sanjena's debut novel, you have change this about your life because it's really, really good. I just wanted to say.
Yeah, I am very excited to be here with Sarah. I can brag a little bit and then you can do your reading. So like Sarah said, I got to meet her I think our very first day of graduate school. And the thing that always comes to mind when I think about Sarah's work before this novel, and then it's a thread through this novel, is she has a voice that is unlike something that I had seen on the page before. A bit of Jamaica Kincaid, a bit of the musicality of Arundhati Roy, and then something that is entirely her own. It's musical, it's lyrical, but it's also incisive. Her characters are smart and cutting, but they're also deeply tenderhearted, and she treats them kindly, even when she lets us see what they do when they're at their worst. So All This Could Be Different is such a special book. I have been meeting people for the last year who have your reaction to it, who have felt themselves changed and transformed by it. And so we're here to kind of celebrate the paperback of it, celebrate it being out for a year. And yeah, I'm so glad that you're here, and thank you to Charis for having us. Are you going to read for us?
Yes, I'll read a little bit. So All This Could Be Different has been out for a year now. And, in a sentence, for any of you who haven't read it, it is the story of a young queer Indian dirtbag who moves to Milwaukee, Wisconsin for her first job out of college, which is, a low-level, grueling corporate consulting gig. And, she reckons with the job, with her first love, this, magnetic, beautiful, slightly troubled ballet dancer, and with her first real friends. And for the first year of this book being out, I read the opening chapter a lot. And I like the opening chapter, but I want to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to read a small passage closer to the end of the novel. So all you need to know, if you have not read the book, is that the main character's name is Sneha. Her close friend is the person she's having a conversation with in this passage, and this person's name is Tig, and they are talking about the ballet dancer at the beginning of the conversation. "So y'all done now?" Tig asked. "I don't see how we come back from the shit I pulled," I said. Tig knelt down. We tied a shoelace. Their feet are very small and delicate. Looking up at me, they asked, You feel like you're okay with it being over? Somewhere within me, a wound opened at its lacy edges, a wild regret spurted, bright and dizzying and carroted. No, I said very quietly. I mean, I'm glad the truth is out, I guess. It was always a lie I stumbled into and was so much work to maintain, and for what, I don't know. No, I don't feel okay. I miss her. I fucked it up. Nothing to be done. My friend said, and we walked in silence for a great long time until they said, I think you can try to see what future's there. Don't be crazy, I said. Again, Tig said, not my type, not what I'd do. If I was going to a new city, I'd take a few months and just focus on being my best hoe self. But that's me, and you're you. You have big feelings for your little danceroo. And she, from the moment I first was introduced, has felt insecure because of her notion that she's the one with feelings, not you. All of which is to say, if you told her you want her, that might hold more weight than you think. Yeah, I said. I'm leaving, though. Bitch, let me introduce you to a concept called gay people. If you haven't done yearning-filled long distance, are you even a lesbian? Just tell her you want her to come with you. To this I said nothing. The sun dipped below the lake's horizon. Light cooling, water graying. Hey, want to go to Garibaldi? Tig asked, feeling a beer, personally. Bro, please, no, I said. I overdrafted my account twice in the last 2 months. Had to break out my CD early, pay this dumbass penalty to even reserve my U-Haul. Ugh, Tig said, I could pay for us. No, broke ass, you spend too much money. Let's just walk. Walking is free. You're such an uncle, Tig said. Please don't be this way in Washington. As we passed Club Garibaldi, a high-ceilinged bar with suits and tattoo sleeves alike, washed-down wings with mud puppy porter, I ignored Tig's wheedling eye. We were by a large brown plaque one had never noticed in the nighttime. Over the damp grass, I walked to it. It said, Bayview's Rolling Mill. Oh shit, Tig said. Yeah, the Bayview massacre that happened here. Huh, I said, and made to read it. But Tig, perhaps given their own struggles with the medium, continued. You had workers all over the country then, working 16-hour days, 6 days a week. Immigrant organizers in Milwaukee. They got people to walk out of work, strike for an 8-hour workday. Literally thousands of people showed, like half the city. Whoa, I said. God's truth, Tig said. Strikers shut down every factory in the city except this one. 14,000 people out here marching. They got the National Guard out, tried to send protesters packing. When they wouldn't leave, these motherfuckers shot at them and came after them with bayonets and shit. Night by now was coming for us, spreading through the sky. A streetlight flickered to life, beamed down. In all my time here, I had not looked at my books on Milwaukee's past. All this history unknown to me. Tig turned to me. Their face flushed, something new and fearsome in it. Don't you dare forget this place, they said. I think you'll eventually make something of yourself out east. One reason why I'm letting you go. Ever become one of those people, nose in the air, calling all this, Tig gestured around wildly, flyover country, thinking we're just about beer and cheese and serial killers and corn. Things happened here. This place is part of why the rest of this stupid, godforsaken nation has child labor laws and workplace safety and unemployment insurance. Why we have weekends and an 8-hour workday. We had 40 years of actual socialist city government, democratically elected here. Only city in the nation. FDR was inspired by what happened here when he dreamed up his little New Deal and shit. Milwaukee, baby. We have real history. Remember us, right? Thank you.
Okay, so I have a bunch of questions, but I'll leave lots of space for audience questions from hybrid and in person. Can you tell us a bit about sort of the origins of this project? When I met you, you were working on a very different thing, and then we were having drinks one night, and you were like, "I'm working on a new project called Milwaukee," and then I think like in my eyes, in a blink of an eye later, this appeared as like a fully formed art object. So I'm curious about where the book started for you and when you knew it really was a novel.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Sandra's absolutely right. I actually worked on a different novel for almost 8 years in fits and starts, and then like quite intensively for a period of about 5 years of those eight. And then, yeah, and it was absolutely the novel I thought was going to be my first. It was this like big immigration doorstopper that was in some ways highly autobiographical, in some ways not. And what the short of it is that that book did not work out. I like wrote it, I redrafted it, I edited it, and then in like 2019, like by the end of 2019, I was sort of starting to face the fact that I did not have what I needed within me to get it to be what I wanted it to be. That was really painful, and I sort of was a little unmoored for a while in my writing journey. And I what I remember about the sort of origin point of this book was that I had written this like long short story that would have been a horrible short story. Like it just was like floating and indistinct, and like things weren't actually happening in it. Like there was like no plot. But I really liked the voice. And so, yeah, I thought it was going to be this like long ass, like Alice Munro style short story called Milwaukee, like one of those like 65-page short stories. And then I was like, this is not a short story, but there's something else here. And I think once I had sufficiently grieved that other project, I was like, okay, this has some potential. I'm going to pay attention to what this could be. And it really helped, I think, to have had the sort of like ego death of that, last project, like I think allow me to just like focus on what this could be.
What made this start to feel alive to you after you were done grieving it? Was it still the voice? Was it another character?
Yeah, I think it was a couple of things, right? Like I think that I made the active intentional decision to catalog everything I had done at a process level with my, with my novel Zero, with my drawer novel. And I was like, okay, bet I'm going to do all these things, this list of like 8 things. I'm going to do the opposite for this project. So I was like, there can never be like more than like 3 to 4 major characters at any point in time. Like most of the book's action happens over a year. So I think there was like an intentional like working against what I'd done before. But the question you ask about aliveness is really interesting. And aliveness is how I often think about my writing after a certain point, like at the 30-page mark or something. I look at it and I reread it and I'm like, is this alive or is this not? Because I think there's a lot of like craft stuff you can fix for, but aliveness to me is like, it's like a house having a foundation, like in the absence of the foundation, there's not a lot you can do. And I do think voice was a huge part of it. It was voice that felt like layered and dense, and honestly felt like I was not in control. Like it just felt like it was like flowing out of me, like I was like a conduit for it. And I felt like I could really see the main character because of the voice. And that's what kept me writing.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you think through sort of the ambitiousness of the project you threw away versus like this novel maybe started as something that seemed slim, but it's a very ambitious project, as those of you who have read it know. There is a multitude found in the focus on a single year. And I'm curious about how it's alive, it's thrumming, it's polyphonic, even though it's only got this one main narrator. And I'm curious about how you think of finding shape out of the sort of muchness that you discovered in that year. Like where did plot and structure emerge from? Did you start with it's going to be a year? Like where do you begin there?
Yeah, I did start to a degree with like some constraints back in the day, like 100 years ago. I used to write poetry, and my poetry was not good. It was not it. But I did notice that the poetry was much better when I was attempting to work within forms versus like writing free verse. And I think that there was a little bit of a lesson in that for me in terms of like trying to create constraint. And so, yeah, I think that the way I thought about it was not just the constraint of like, okay, only 1 year, and only a few characters, but a rule I set for myself, partly because my previous work, some of it had felt like just like sprawling in unproductive ways. I was like, everything that happens has to do something in the novel. And what ended up, so I didn't have like a detailed plot list, of things that were going to happen. I just sort of knew what I wanted it to feel like. I knew I wanted to have like blood family, chosen family, romance, and the material realities of our lives all form the like concerns of this novel, and to some degree the like, the ticking clock of plot that many novels have. I wanted the narrator's like spiraling bank account and, scary relationship with her landlord to be as much of the plot as like whether or not she got the girl. And so knowing that, I still didn't know, okay, in this chapter this is going to happen, in this other chapter that's going to happen. But what I did know is once I wrote something, I thought of it as a ball I'd thrown up into the air, and I was like, just as in juggling, like I have to be able to like receive it, it has to like fall down and be caught at some point. And so that, I think, what allowed me to like create some kind of cohesion. And it turns out, like, I mean, this is something I see in your work too, which is like, I think, I don't know, we are both interested in a multitude of things, I think, like artistically and politically. And, contrary to some of the like craft advice that I know I have gotten in the past, which definitely involved, here you have this character, let him or her like focus on like one or two things. It has not been my experience that like I live a single issue life, and your characters don't, contend with only one thing, they contend with a multitude. And I think that that's true to how many of us experience the world.
Yeah. A writer we both love, Zadie Smith, writes a lot about the idea of the I and the we in fiction. And one of the things that I think is so special about this book is that it is told from a first-person perspective. So it begins with an I, but it is about a we in so many ways. And you all saw that in the excerpt that Sarah just read. Like politically, it's about the we of workers and people having sort of fates intertwined with one another. But it's also about a friend group and how they all operate together. And there are a few really strongly sketched characters, and you get to know all of them really well, even when they're not the narrator. I wonder if you can talk about the project of writing I's and we's and how that weighed on this book.
Yeah, thank you for asking me this. Yeah, I mean, I think that there was so much I didn't know when I first started writing the book, right? Like, I think part of the like weird magic of writing a novel is actually that you can't and shouldn't know everything from the beginning. Like a good novel to me is like capacious enough that like any of our own dumb little brains like isn't actually able to like hold the entire scroll of it. But I did know from like the 15-page mark. And I think you can actually see, even though it's been like drafted and redrafted and edited, you can see like a certain kind of like quickening in the prose that matches up that realization. I did know by that 15-page mark that I wanted the overall arc to be the delta or transition from an I, in this case, like someone who is ordinary and apolitical and atomized, alienated and alone, like really deeply alone in all these ways, to end up in a we. And I didn't know what the we would look like. All I knew is that I did not want it to end. Like, I knew this, I was working within like a coming of age form, right? And I knew that I did not want this particular coming of age form to end up with like the main character getting married, the main character like finding romantic love as like the sort of site of closure and resolution. And so I was like, okay, what are structures for the we? Like I thought of structures of collectivity. At the time, I was also, I wrote this book in like mostly in 2020, which was a year of change and tumult in many of our lives. And in my own particular life, many things happened, including earlier that year, I like lost my job. COVID came for New York, the city I live in. And I was doing a lot of organizing in my neighborhood, which is, large and robust and historic. And a lot of that organizing for me, like mutual aid organizing, just provided me with lots of examples of the ways in which people can A, show up for each other, B, misread each other, C, just participate in each other's creation. And I thought, oh, what would it look like to attempt to document something like this in fiction. You know, I was not trying at all to like write a novel about a mutual aid group. But I think that there are ways in which I like was like, okay, given that we're not going to do a mutual aid group, I was like, is the structure of a we like a union? Could it be like a protest? You know, like the George Floyd uprising was happening in 2020. And then I was like, you know, I think it's going to be a friend group. And then I was like, I think given that so much of my own experience of an immigrant's journey involves this question of like, what is home? And the main character in this novel really struggles with non-lofty questions of home, like simple questions of like, can I keep living in this fucking place? You know, that like, can I like remain secure and housed? I was like, oh, like it's going to be this combination of friend group, found family, and collectivity around what home can be.
Yeah, that's such a good lesson too. And like when you're thinking about high ideals and like how you want your art to hold them, it's just like it's there in everyone's day-to-day lives. Like she has a bank account. She has one of the worst landlords in the history of literature, who is so well sketched, and just like a Midwestern nightmare. I have so many questions off of that. I'm trying to figure out where to go. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the way ambition operates in the book, because I've heard you say before that it was important to you to make Sneha, the protagonist, an everyman, and that there's a power in that. And I think that's such an interesting idea in a kind of literary and artistic landscape where people are always trained to ask, like, but what does your main character want? What are they striving for? We want to see them really work hard for something. So can you talk about sort of ambition?
Yeah, I think that you know, the group, sort of the novel ends up becoming, though we start with Sneha, who, you know, is very much a like someone who's motivated by the like more basic needs on like Maslow's hierarchy in some ways. You know, she like wants to be safe, to be housed, to feel moderately successful, but like does not necessarily care about prestige. I think she feels like an enormous like crushing weight of responsibility and guilt towards her parents, who have I think been treated very badly by the overall like state immigration carceral apparatus in the US. And so she feels very much like her parents' lives were compost for her own, and so she has to like make good on her parents' sacrifice. But beyond that, you know, she's not, and this is sort of revealed in conversations and conflict between the characters, between Sneha and her friends. Like she's not trying to like be a boss, be a baller. Like she's like, and she's certainly not trying to be like an activist or revolutionary. One of her friends wants to be something of a proto-revolutionary, like wants to like, is like visionary and wants to change the way a lot of things are done. And one of her other friends wants to, yeah, I think like just live in a way that in a way where he feels admirable, you know, and I think he starts to see the writing on the wall where he's not going to like ascend up a corporate ladder. He's not going to like succeed in certain ways. And so he, you know, decides to focus more on like radical politics. But Sneha, I do see her as an everyman. I think that on average, most people want politics to feel simple. They want, and I'm so sympathetic to that. I think it makes all the sense in the world. Like people want to understand what it is they should do. They want that to not be too hard. They want to live like good and easy lives and to be told that they are not bad people, you know? And I was just like, oh, I can like imagine what it would be like to be like a young, like unpoliticized person, like moving in this sphere. And so I hoped that in watching, you know, Sneha like fumble and be 22 and messy and have questions about the world, that the reader could, one, feel like not taught or, you know, like condescended to politically, and could sort of like go on their own journey of, you know, of question making and meaning making as they watched, you know, this like young dirtbag figure shit out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that was the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about the Mutual Aid Society is like when part of your artistic project is to imagine alternate futures. And I mean, it's like there in the title of the book, there is hope built into it. But then what is your obligation to sort of like build out and actualize an alternate future in the text versus kind of posit it, and then there are jokes around it. There's fumbling, there's fights around that possibility of an alternative. And how do you balance the sort of impulse to show where it will go wrong and like actually actualize it in the text?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really hard and complicated, right? And I mean, I think that's something that I will say for myself in the like longer project of my art making. I actually don't have any deep ambition to like make or do activist art. I actually think that like what I am trying to figure out in most of my fiction is like what is true, what is real, and what like it's thinking through a problem that I feel consumed by. And in actuality, you know, when like one of my fears when I was drafting this book was maybe this idea that like it would come across like I was, you know, writing and being like everyone should like, you know, not participate in the couple form and also like live communally, and that's not actually the intention. I think that the heart of one part of what I was like trying to do in this novel at a formal level is you know, articulate that the world as it is, as we all experience it, is a made thing. You know, it's a consensus, like hallucination that we're all participating in. And by that logic, it can be remade. But no one has a really good answer, in my opinion, for how that remaking should happen. And the like tremendous amount of work and difficulty and trade-off that could look like at the smallest level. And so I was just like, okay, let me look at it at the smallest level, which is literally some young people trying to figure out like where they should live, you know, and like how to be a little bit more materially secure, and just dramatize the problems they would run into both structurally and also with each other in that pursuit. And I think that the work of building consensus, I guess, is what I felt interested in. And the work of like forming a togetherness is what I felt interested in documenting more than advancing any kind of like, hey, do this, you know?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You have called Sneha a dirtbag a few times. I want you to talk about what that means and why it's important.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, it's funny because I feel very, very like tender towards her, and maybe the like criticism is like preemptive. It's like I want to get there before somebody else, you know. It's like she's so unlikable. But yeah, I think that Sneha is 22. She is somebody who is, one, young and relatively unformed, and two, like has in the larger scheme of things been dealt a difficult hand of cards, and is also sort of like very like prideful, a little bit like masculine affectively, and like won't like does not want to deal with some of her shit, and heal, and so you kind of see her through the book, I think, make a lot of messes through a series of like refusals to accept real things that actually happened, and through trying to navigate, frankly, like deeply contradictory desires, you know, the desire to be the good daughter to her parents that she wants to be, the desire to like follow through on her sexuality, her like the truth of her life and body in all these ways, and she's also just, you know, just a little, she gets depressed, she like doesn't clean her apartment, you know, leaves some problems, she's dishonest with her long-suffering girlfriend, she's dishonest with her long-suffering friend, and all the characters, in my opinion, in this novel are flawed, because have you ever met someone who's not flawed? But I'm sort of interested in this idea that like we can keep missing each other in our relational lives and our relational webs, and still, like, I think leave ourselves open to the possibility of eventually meeting each other as our true selves, as our reconciled selves.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious also about that sort of like burden of likability, which I think is something that we talk about all the time. But the burden of likability coupled with the burden of representation, which sits on you as a queer brown writer when you're writing a queer brown character. And I'm curious if you ever feel when you're in your like little writer's cavern and trying to shut the world out, how do you hold that? Do you worry about whether people will call your character unlikable? And if you do, what do you do about it?
No, that immediately after I answer, I will be asking you a version of the same question because I'm really curious about how you think about this in your own fiction. But in short, so I did not think about likability at all when I was writing, partly because I don't find it like a useful frame. Like to me, it's a review economy word. It's a little bit goofy. I think that, like I think about the works of like literature that I like grew up with / like made me myself, and they involve fictional characters doing wild things, right? Like, I mean, going beyond the question of like an ordinary likability, dislikability, like someone in like one of the characters in Toni Morrison's novel sets her own son on fire, right? Like how, like to me, like that is literature, that is drama, like, and the idea of applying the question of like likability, like you have to laugh. You just have to laugh. And so, not like I'm not making any kind of like comparison, as much as I am saying that like like a writer who's very much like trying to like figure out my own way and my own voice and the things I want to say, I cannot be bothered if somebody is like, oh, like, I wouldn't like hang out with that girl. It's cool. Like she doesn't exist. She's in a book, like I'm trying to make you think about something. And I think that, so that's the first part of my answer. That I did not care about likability. I maybe felt quite concerned about lovability. I loved all my characters, I like cared deeply for them. I felt like it was my job to inhabit each of them to the best of my like limited ability, and really think through what life and their own specific personal histories had been, so I could like write something true for all of them. I think what felt more complicated was representation, and this is what I decided for myself, which is that I came of age, after like immigrating to the US in like Obama era America. Representational politics and discussion around it was very much like part of the ether in all these ways. And it definitely really shaped me. I began to think of it as like an intrinsic virtue. And I think the last few years for me has involved a repudiation of like representational politics as like a goal unto itself. I'm much more interested in the question of like, and I think it's we've seen moments of this like shift like happen in the larger culture. There are all those memes about like the first female, drone commander or whatever. And like, is that actually advancing some kind of good politics? I'm just much more interested in this question of like, who is power being marshaled for, and I think that it is a really double-edged sword for writers and artists of marginalized backgrounds to worry too much about representation, because you then you are put in the position of having to be an emissary of our communities and represent them in positive lights only, which just involves not telling truth, and that leads to failed art.
Amazing. I have nothing to add.
Shutting me down.
No, I mean, I think that's a great answer. And I similarly, I didn't think about this stuff when I was in school, when I was just reading books that I loved. But it became a thing when I entered the world and existed as a teacher and as a writer. And I think that is a coherent and complete worldview that serves as a nice hedge against it for us all. You said that there were a couple of books that made you who you are. Can you talk about what those are?
A beautiful question. I think that The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy is it's set in my home state of Kerala. It captures a world that I know, and it like broke me into like two clean pieces when I first read it as a teenager. Like I just had never read anything like it. If any of you have not read it, it holds up, 25 years later. Yeah, so it's extraordinary. Absolutely a book that made me who I am. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, also read around that time. I read a whole bunch of books at 14 and 15, specifically and literally because I was told not to read them. And so I literally was just like, okay, I'm not supposed to read this book, next on the list, So if you're wondering, about the efficacy of things like book bans, just know. But yeah, I think The Bluest Eye like really, really, really like rearranged me in a way that honestly, like looking back, there's something comical about it, because I was like this like weird lonely teenager, like Indian teenager in Oman who had never met a white person or a black person, and here I was like losing my shit at The Bluest Eye. So I wonder about that sometimes and what was happening inside my brain. And then Zadie Smith, White Teeth in particular. I think those were some of the books. I also read, I think my late teens, I started reading a lot of poetry, mostly by like white guy modernists, but they really did it for me. What can I say? Like, and then Adrienne Rich, like I read a lot of Adrienne Rich. Yeah.
That's great. I'm going to turn to y'all with an opportunity to ask questions in a few minutes. So I have just one more for now, and then I'm going to turn it over. This is one of my favorite covers that I've ever seen. It's so good. And it also, like the title for me really clicked when I saw your cover. And I wonder if you can talk about the process of like going from a manuscript to having this beautiful piece of art on your book.
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I think that it's funny, I like there's so much I did not know about simple process and the degree. Speaking of collectivity, the number of people it takes to like make a book, make like the Word documents, like the like reasonably democratically available, like art objects that like exists on, the shelves behind us. Like, I think that there's something like really cool and magical about that. But on the specific subject of the cover, I feel like I can say now that I did not super vibe with some of the earlier drafts of like, it's always like this iterative process. And the first few drafts that like my publishing team at Viking sent me, I was like, I don't know. And I think that just like the reality is like every author or writer like has a vision of how they wish their book to like be and look in the world. And publishing, like publishers are interested in like making art available, but they also like there's a commercial imperative as well. And so I think the first few rounds, I think there was like a little bit of a tension between these two things. And then at some point, maybe this was like the 8th iteration, I was like, oh, we're getting somewhere. And then the 9th iteration, they sent this like almost exactly this, just like slightly different font and stuff, but they were using this painting, Another Green World by Nicole Eisenman, who like completely independently, like is one of my like favorite contemporary painters, is this like amazing non-binary painter with this wild history. Like look it up if y'all don't know, like just like really, really interesting life and story. And I was like, oh, this is perfect for like 1000 Reasons. It kind of like gestured towards like the group portrait nature of the novel. And like, I don't know, it's a party. And they're like the first major set piece in the novel is a party. And I just felt like, this novel, I think tonally it's interested in like many things, but also this mixture of, there's a lot of talk for me about like community and togetherness and all this other stuff, but there's also like I think a frank examination of the loneliness and alienation that I suspect all of us have lived with at some point, walked through at some point. And if you look closely at the painting, you see moments of that aloneness as well amidst all the other people, all the other painted characters. And that's what really like made me love it so much.
Cool. Let's give Sarah a hand. And we'll open it up for questions. You want to call on people?
Happy to, yeah.
So I'll bring the mic around. And we just want to get your voice. I'll read one of our questions from our virtual folks.
That'd be great.
So Sarah Lerner said, first off, not a question, but I love how vehemently this book / TIG defends the Midwest. Midwesterners are cool too.
Correct.
But Sarah's question is, I absolutely love this book and your gorgeous prose. Where did you get the idea for the pink house?
In short, it was something that, like I wanted, it was something, and in 2020 in particular, felt like something that I felt like profound longing around. And it also did not seem super realizable. Living where I live in New York, one of the more expensive places for real estate in the entire country. And one of the thoughts I had, this is completely unrelated to the writing of this novel at this point. One of the thoughts I had was like, if I still lived in Milwaukee, this would be a lot easier. And I was like, oh, wait, actually. And so, yeah, I think that combined with desiring like a structure for collectivity and like togetherness, that's what enabled the pink house.
Thank you. For our local folks, anybody?
Yeah.
First of all, glad to have God of Small Things representation. The little anime girl meme with like, whatever mentioned, God of Small Things mentioned. It's a really fucked up book. If you haven't read it, the fucking orange drink, lemon drink, man.
Mm-hmm.
That shit's, and it's like written like a cartoon. It's so fucked up. Anyway, my question is, what is the relationship to you between, I don't know, like politics in your writing, like political themes, and that question of aliveness?
I feel like I get your question at like an 80% level. Will you rephrase it for me just so I'm answering it? And tell me your name too.
Amy.
So
I know that like aliveness is sort of like a question of vibe, right? It's like the Emily Dickinson thing. Like,
yeah.
Is my verse alive? But also having your book as like a living thing in political reality, like, I don't know. I feel like the relationship is different probably for everyone. So like, how do you think about this now? How did you think about it when you were writing this book?
Yeah, that's a really beautiful question. Here's the best I think I can do at answering it in the moment. For me, the question of aliveness was fundamentally around getting the reader to suspend their disbelief that this was like, like some made up shit, because it is, right? Like any fiction, it's a made up shit. And so what I wanted was for the book to feel as real as possible. Which meant many things, including making the characters feel like as real and deeply imagined as possible. I didn't necessarily think about like how the book operated in political reality as like part of that aliveness. But what I think your question is helping me like make a mental connection right now. I think part of deeply imagining these young people involved imbuing them with like questions of like struggle and meaning making that I myself and many of the people I'm closest to were asking, and involved, I think, like drawing from our lived political reality that we're all, so sorry to everyone, suspended in. And so I think that's where the connection came. I wasn't necessarily trying for like a virtuous politics to arrive at the aliveness, but I was trying for like a lived, and like urgent politics to arrive there. Thank you for that question.
I ran into Sarah in the parking lot, and I was too nervous to say it then, but this is literally my favorite book.
Oh my God.
And it's funny because I first bought it because I was looking for representation. I also grew up in the Middle East. My family's from the same state originally as yours is, and I could tell from your name. So
The Malus always know.
yeah. So that's what drew me to the book. But what made it my favorite book while I was reading it was the in-depth character study and how real all the characters felt, like you've talked about so many times before. So I was wondering how you managed to achieve that. Are they based on people in real life? And they're all so distinct. You know, each of them have such distinct characters that I was just wondering how you managed to get them to that place.
Yeah, I think that first of all, like, thank you, holy shit. Like, I briefly passed away when you were saying that. It truly like means so much that that you said that. So thank you, Tara. And I think that on the level of characterization, it just honestly is so important to me. You know, like, it feels like the thing that I, in my drafting, get wrong the most often, and that, like, then I'm like, okay, whatever, like, throw it over my shoulder, let's start again, just because it is the thing that trips me up the most when reading, when I'm like, oh, I don't believe this person's real, you know, or they're like certain interventions of like authorial vanity or what have you, or only one character feels real. And so it just felt so stressful and important to me to get that right. And I think that part of attempting to get it right for me involved, like, one, doing something that this writer and friend of mine called Keenan Walsh calls slow acting, where I just sort of like it felt like a process of like slow, boring acting of like just like imagining myself as all the characters in different scenes, and, you know, like thinking that through. And absolutely, some of the characters are inspired by like portions, you know, like 30% of this person, 30% of another person, of people I know. But I would not call them like direct representations of people I know, mostly because those people wouldn't want that. But yeah, I think it'd always be helpful to draw from life, and then simultaneously, given that I wasn't trying to write a memoir, you know, even if there's like bits of autobiography in there for sure, I think it's useful to be like, what are you trying to do by marshaling these like moments of inspiration? Like, what is this character like functioning as? And that, like, asking those structural questions also really helped me. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi, Viv. Hi. This is amazing. And I had a similar question about place. Like, how do you see the Milwaukee that you know, like, overlap or different, or like be different from the Milwaukee of the novel? Like, how is it similar and how is it different?
Oh, what a good question. I mean, I think that it did not occur to me to be stressed about how I represented Milwaukee, a place I'm not from, but like, you know, my main character spent about a year of time in. It did not occur to me to worry about how Milwaukee was depicted until I was like writing the last 30 pages of my first draft. And then I was like, whoa, you know, like, I just like, it just sort of hit me like at my own like audacity / like temerity in like writing a whole novel about a place that like I'm not from, B, had not spent a huge amount of time in, even though it represented like a very important like chapter in my life. I think that there's a degree to which I just tried to think about why set the novel in Milwaukee. Like, I asked myself that a few times, and part of it was like, yeah, like I like remembered a lot of vivid details that I could use, you know, and I think that sometimes it's just helpful to be like, here's something I don't want to research actually, and I'm going to like draw from memory and be like, this restaurant is here, this restaurant is there. I think I also had a little bit of like living, you know, in a big East Coast city, like chip on my shoulder of a like, hey, like, don't talk down to like half of the rest of the country. And so that like defensiveness came through. But yeah, I think that there are a bunch of ways in which like I just kept thinking, what does this place mean to Sneha, my main character? And as long as I sort of like stayed suspended in her point of view, like Milwaukee as this site of 2013 politics, in a variety of ways, like small p politics. Milwaukee is a site of like self-discovery, becoming, struggle, and eventually, like, once she, very small spoiler, like leaves for a period of time, like becomes this site of like remembered like love. Like that's what allowed me to like stay true to like stay coherent in like any kind of like characterization of the place.
Hi, I'm Agnes.
Hi, Agnes.
I don't know if we'll see what comes out. I'm really interested in this like triangulation of like scarcity, like material scarcity, but also mental scarcity in like terms of like mental health, and then how that all comes together in terms of like your main character's lack of leap engagement with mighty activism as well. And it's interesting maybe to see how in taking care of the self, you can take care of the we. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really like insightful question, and it's something that I think you see the characters like fight their way through, and like back and forth in the novel itself. Like there are scenes when Tig, who's sort of like the most like visionary, character, is like dreaming of different futures, and also some maybe missing / is also being actively misled by their friends about like the increasingly dire straits that their friend Sneha is in, and from Sneha's point of view, she's like, why is this bitch talking to me about radical futures when like my apartment is a biohazard and I have like $600 to my name and I like literally am being ground down like glass on the highway, under like passing cars. And so I think I don't necessarily have answers for so many political questions. Actually, what I feel like I can do in fiction is like dramatize the questions. And that's mostly what I tried to do here.
What was it like to talk about the political parts of your book in DC, where you lived after Milwaukee and lived a very different political life?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I think in practice, we did not talk at length about politics. I was in DC yesterday, and I lived in DC for a little while after I like worked in progressive politics writ large, and I think even if we had talked about politics, Sanjena, I think what is really like interesting and kind of like magical to me is that the culture has changed so dramatically. I think that there's certain like political gestures within this novel that even like my progressive DC colleagues would, and maybe like a very easily a version of myself, from like 6 years ago or 7 years ago, would have like sneered at. And there's so much more of a sense, in my opinion, of the structures that order our lives being untenable, even on the part of like comfortable white collar, policy professionals, that I think that there was real openness to like hearing, hearing these sorts of questions be dramatized about the sort of like unlivability of the currently constructed world we're in now. So we love a change in the Overton window, is what I'm saying.
Okay, I have one to close this out, and then
Sounds
let's
good.
go. This book is about a community, and you have quite a community of writers. And I wonder if you could talk to people about the importance of the people you surround yourself with and how that feeds your work, or doesn't feed if they're toxic. You don't have to do that. But what we's are important in making art?
Yeah. Oh, what a beautiful question. I'm almost finding myself at a loss for words, because the we's are essential. I think that like so many of the messages we get about so many different things as young people are flawed. And I think one of the messages that I really regret internalizing was that of the like artist capital A, you know, like writing alone at the desk. And I think that everything that is worth anything is done with other people. And I found that to be true in my writing life. You know, I think that we all in our writing need other people, and it has been everything to have been able to show my friends who are writers and readers drafts of my work, to hear the ways in which the work is wanting or needs development, like has its, you know, like soft spots, like a baby skull, in its development. And I think it's also, you know, aside from the improvement of the work, there's also the fundamental reality that writing is lonely. It represents a tremendous amount of, like, making art is lonely. Trying to do many things that are important and represent like a sustained effort of the self are hard if you're doing them alone. And to know that you're in the trenches with other people who are also trying to like make something that is meaningful and alive, it's really important and it's really moving. And we have the option of not feeling alone. So like, why not take that option is my larger feeling.
Y'all were so great. Thank you to Charis.
Buy the book,
Sanjena.
have Sarah sign it. Yay, thanks for coming. Thanks for having us.
Thank you both so much. So I want to say goodnight to our virtual friends. Y'all can click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy All This Could Be Different. It really does help us when you purchase books directly from us. You can, of course, also buy Gold Diggers. We are happy for you to do that.
By Gold Diggers.
Yes, it is a wonderful book, as Sarah was saying. And if somehow it passed you by, it is not too late. So we're going to say goodnight to you. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. And for all of you,